A team of experts at evacuating animals during emergencies and disasters travelled to Australia from New Zealand earlier this month to help as those bushfires raged out of control. Now, Steve Glassey used to be the head of SPCA in Wellington, and he set up Animal Evac in 2018, an organisation that helps with evacuations to make sure no animals are left behind, and it also provides temporary emergency shelter. He was in Australia with his team, and he joins me now from our Wellington studio. Hi, Steve.
Good afternoon, Jesse.
Was it a no-brainer to go over to Australia and help?
Yeah, look, we had a moral obligation to do something about the animals that were affected from that disaster. And when the call came basically in, we didn't have much money in the bank account. So we were given assistance by SAFE, the animal advocacy organisation, and we put a team on the ground and just hoped that we would get some funding from donors, etc., to maintain the response. And on the first day that we arrived, we were straight into the Blue Mountains rescuing kangaroos that had been affected by this devastating fire.
How tough a job was that?
Look, we're quite fortunate that in the team that we deploy, a lot of the members had already been involved in either war zones, conflicts or humanitarian aid missions overseas. So even though the images were confronting, the team was reasonably adjusted working in these kinds of conditions, and we needed teams that weren't going to be emotional, that were going to be professional, and they've already highly trained. So we make sure that all the people going over on these deployments are trained in fire safety to make sure that they can be safe on those fire grounds. So yeah, it was a lot of preparation that went into it.
We've got some lovely photos that have been taken. Well, lovely photos. They're certainly very striking photos. People can check them out on our website, rnz.co.nz/Jesse. Was it hard work?
Oh, it was. It was very long days, and it also was frustrating too. So, to give some context to the environment that these animals had to survive, alloy rims, alloy engines were completely melted from cars. So, aluminium burns or melts at 600 degrees C. Glass had melted. Glass burns at or melts at about 1,000 degrees C. So we know that some of the fires that these animals had to try to survive from were in excess of 1,000 degrees Celsius. So trying to find an animal that had actually survived was a little bit like finding a needle in a haystack. But after 4 hours for one search operation, we managed to find one echidna in this absolute blackened desert. So his name was Edward, and he was relocated to somewhere nicer and safer where he had food sources.
I don't mean to sound cynical, Steve, but we're hearing reports that like 1 billion animals might have died in these fires, and so is 4 hours searching out one echidna time well spent?
Yeah, look, every life is precious to us, and I think the ability to go over and provide hope for these animals is really important. Whether it's one or it's 1,000, that's really important to us. And to give you an idea, it wasn't just going out there and doing all the sexy rescue stuff. We went to the township of Bundanoon. We knew it was going to be potentially hit hard. It was under serious warnings for evacuation. And so we went in basically the day before it was due to sort of peak in terms of its fire conditions, and distributed over 150 pet carriers to ensure that people would be able to safely evacuate their pets. So we know that the lack of availability of pet carriers is a causal factor for evacuation failure. So we're pretty confident that by doing that, we've saved at least 150 people and potentially animals as well.
What sorts of animals did you run into in your time in Australia?
Everything apart from a koala. So echidnas, wallabies, kangaroos, horses, cats, dogs, but mainly it was wildlife. I mean, the good thing about the fires over there is that the Royal Fire Service was fantastic in terms of really solid information. They had a great mapping system called Fires Near Me, and that meant that any animal that had some form of guardianship by a human made sure that those animals, in most cases, weren't going to be threatened. It was the wildlife that doesn't have that human sort of guardianship that were exposed and unfortunately devastated by this disaster.
And so, how are you feeling emotionally having come back? Was it pretty draining?
Oh, look, it was draining, but to be honest, I'm really proud. I'm really proud that we managed to represent New Zealand as action-oriented, professional and caring individuals. Australians obviously have a close connection to New Zealand, and I think it was important for us, not just for the animals, but for our brand as New Zealand to be there supporting our Australian colleagues that are going through this devastating event.
Why did you set up this organisation?
Well, going back to the Edgecombe floods, I was in charge of the SPCA's response to that, and over 1,000 animals were left behind in Edgecombe without much of a plan or even sort of resource or capacity, and that really led me to believe that we have to have something better in place for future emergencies. I mean, Edgecombe's a small town. If you look at the Hutt Valley, for example, there's 40,000 homes on the most densely populated floodplain in New Zealand. Edgecombe had 600 homes. So if we were to have a major flood in Hutt Valley, what would happen with all these animals? And we know from research that if people can't evacuate with their animals, they're going to put themselves at risk. They're going to head back into the cordons to get their animals, and that puts people and public safety responders at risk. So this is about saving people and animals at the same time.
Animals really capture the imagination of people, don't they? I mean, sometimes they can be a real motivator for people to give money, to contribute. Is there enough funding and enough of a plan for animals here in New Zealand in case of that sort of disaster?
Look, I think there's always going to be room for improvement, and I think New Zealand witnessing what's happened in Australia can be potentially a cause for good for people to ask that very question and ask, do we have resources in place? I mean, sadly at the moment, the current civil defence arrangements do not reimburse any operational costs for groups such as ourselves that are assisting in civil defence emergencies. We put a report to Parliament with the assistance of Gareth Hughes earlier this year, and it would be great if the government would pick up some of the recommendations, all the recommendations from that report, so that animals are afforded better protections in emergencies. In the US, following Katrina, they passed specific legislation at the federal level because it was seen as critical for not just saving animals, but for saving people. So we look forward to some ongoing dialogue with government to ensure that we can be prepared, because events like this will happen in New Zealand, and so we're actively searching for volunteers to join us to be ready.
Was it hard to leave Australia?
Yeah, it was. We have operating protocols in place that we do not have team members deployed for too long to prevent fatigue and also compassion impacts as well. But when we arrived, it was really at the peak of that fire disaster. I remember we were in Bundanoon, there was 147 fires in New South Wales, and some 67 were still not even contained. By the time we left, there was only 69 fires and 20 to be contained. So when we arrived, there was lots of smoke. We're driving at night time and you'll see all the fires around the highway. That was unsettling, but again, we've got people that have been involved in wildfire response before. So it's good to be home, and if things escalate and the government over there requires additional support, we're certainly available to assist.
And what's the message to people who think they might like to get involved with your organisation?
Well, we've got a couple of events coming up. We do have a public talk at the Southern Cross this Thursday, and tickets will be available on Eventbrite. But we're also recruiting for volunteers. So those foundation courses for Animal Evac are available on Eventbrite currently. We'd love for more New Zealanders to be part of this team. We take and accept and encourage people from all kinds of backgrounds, not just vets, not just paramedics, but there's a space for everyone to be part of this organisation and to ensure we've got better prepared communities in the future.
Steve Glassey from Animal Evac, thank you very much